Welcome to the Billy Wilder Theater, home of the UCLA Film and Television Archive's public programs. My name is Nicole Ucedo. I am the Programming Coordinator for the archive. And I'm so pleased to welcome you to tonight's screening of The Solitude of Memory and Songs My Brother Taught Me, and our closing night of the Displacement Fluctuations of Home film series. This free screening, along with all of our year-round public programming, is made possible by the generosity of an anonymous donor, and we are very grateful for their support. Special thanks as well to tonight's community partner, the UCLA International Institute, and all of the archive staff that worked to make this happen. Fluctuations of Home co-programmer Biandra July couldn't be here this evening, but I would also like to give her a special shout out for imagining the series with me and bringing it to the big screen. This past summer, we did the first version of the series on the subject of home, and since then we've just seen violence escalate on the streets of the US as we continue to see our neighbors abducted from their homes and families. I'm grateful that we've had the opportunity to highlight films from around the world that focus on shelter, safety, and community, especially during this time when homes and families are being torn apart. While the summer version of the series focused on local issues and domestic titles, our current series has mostly looked at home and housing abroad. However, tonight's screening brings us back to North America, with The Solitude of Memory set in Jalisco, Mexico, and Songs My Brother Taught Me in the Pine Ridge Reservation of South Dakota. Both films have a strong emphasis on family and loss, though different in genre. I'm really excited that The Solitude of Memory filmmaker and UCLA School of Theater, Film and Television professor Juan Pablo González is here tonight for a Q&A after his film, which we will screen first. It is always wonderful to highlight the work of UCLA faculty. And so after the Q&A, we're going to go straight into Chloe Zhao's first feature, The Songs My Brothers Taught Me, so please hang tight for that. After the short, I'll be back to introduce Juan Pablo González. And as a reminder, please put away and silence your phones. You're welcome to take photos during the Q&A, but not during the screenings. So enjoy The Solitude of Memory. See you in a little bit. Now I'd like to introduce tonight's speaker. Juan Pablo González is a filmmaker whose works span fiction and nonfiction. His films are largely based in his hometown of Atotonilco el Alto. Dos Estaciones from 2022 was Juan Pablo's feature-length debut, which received the Special Jury Award for Acting at the Sundance Film Festival and screened at New Directors, New Films MoMA and Lincoln Center, at San Sebastián International Film Festival and Morelia International Film Festival. In 2025, Juan Pablo received the Creative Capital Award for his upcoming nonfiction film, The Measure of Time. And in 2024, he was awarded the prestigious Guggenheim Fellowship, the same year that he also became a McDowell Fellow. Currently, Juan Pablo's entire body of work is being featured on the Criterion Channel, and Juan Pablo González is currently the Vice Chair and Head of Production at UCLA's Department of Film, Television, and Digital Media. Please welcome Juan Pablo to the stage. Hello.
Hi.
Well, first I actually wanted to ask how it was seeing it on the big screen again, because it's been a while, right?
Yeah, it's been a long time. I don't think I had seen this film in maybe 11 years.
Oh.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was very... I actually think it was very emotional for me this time. Yeah. Just, yeah.
It's a very emotional film.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen it a few times recently, and it hits every time, and knowing the characters, I'm sure it's especially impactful for you. And I kind of wanted to focus on home since, for the first few questions, since the series been about home and housing, and this is one of the films that you made in Atotonilco el Alto, Jalisco, where you're from, right? Or nearby.
Yeah, no, I'm from there. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And so, yeah, can you talk about the decision to make work in your hometown and how that relationship has shifted since you've moved away, and how has, documenting it or portraying it as a subject or character changed your view of it?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, Nicole, for inviting me to show this film. I feel like, at the time when I made this film, I was much younger. I was actually a student, and I was thinking a lot about home because, so I grew up in this town, Atotonilco el Alto, and then I moved to a bigger city, Guadalajara, and then when I made this film, I was living in the US. And I had always had a strange relationship with Atotonilco because I had very beautiful years living there, but then for a long time I felt like if I wanted to be an artist, I kind of had to negate that upbringing. And it was strangely, it wasn't until I moved to the US and maybe I was exposed to other type of art or other type of pieces that made me think a lot about home. I think moving to the US made me think a lot about home, and then I kept thinking, well, where is actually my home? Is my home in Guadalajara or is my home in Atotonilco? And um, and when I went back and made this film in Atotonilco, I realized there was something about that place, about growing up there, that just was, I don't know, I don't know if home is a place, right? But at least it felt like there was something about that place that I just felt like I could explore deeper and deeper and deeper layers of the place, especially because, you know, at the time, I guess maybe I was a bit ignorant at the time, but at the time I felt like there was no filmmaking really happening in Mexico, at least from people who were coming from those places. Um, you know, and yeah, I don't want to talk about representation or anything. It was just like I wasn't maybe seeing that, so I was thinking I cannot be a filmmaker if I make films in my home. And then after this film, I realized like, oh, I feel like now I cannot be a filmmaker without making films there, because the more I go, you know, I've been going there every year, every year, every year. And actually this family that I made the Solitude of Memory with, The Measure of Time, they're also in this film, this new film. I'm using some material actually from this short in the film. And yeah, and then it just became a place where I could just sense that there was so much to say about it, you know?
And you mentioned that you're not sure if home is a place, and that was another question I had for you about after watching the film and thinking of the series that we did, which has some films that might talk about home or housing in a more literal sense. I think your film is deeply rooted in place. So it's a place that you know well. It's a place that the family is, the family unit is from, and then this tragedy happens. But I think the film also speaks to that question, like, is home actually, family, community? And you see Jose being uprooted when Nando passes. So can you talk about that? Like, was that something on your mind as you were filming, this idea of home changing through loss and home being people?
Yeah, definitely the idea of home being people. It's also, you know, important maybe to contextualize when when I was making this film. You know, I know, of course, immigration is a very important topic right now. At the time, it was as well, because we were discovering, you know, through the beginning of the 2000s that, first of all, I don't know if you know this, but, you know, in the end of the 90s, beginning of the 2000s, there was kind of an exodus of people from rural Mexico to the US, um, because of NAFTA, right? And what the US did was that they didn't want to, they instead of building, a wall through the entire border, what they did is they built it in specific areas to to throw migrants into the desert, and so they would die, right? So hundreds of thousands of people died in those decades, and the film was gonna touch on that a little bit, because this family has a very particular history of migration, right? And especially Jose's oldest son was living in the U.S. when this happened, right? Um, and so in these towns, in these places, we have a lot of people who live far away, who we've known and then we don't see again either ever, or we see them, 10 years, 15 years later, right? And so this question obviously is very important, right? Because a lot of those people find home in their own communities, and then their homes, like you say, are somewhat uprooted, and their homes are changed pretty drastically, right? Um, and and again, I wasn't necessarily thinking about the idea of home in the film because I was so focused on grief and memory. But definitely, it was something that I had been thinking a lot about, first by moving out of the country, but also by all these histories and stories of people from my hometown that were coming to the US, and some of them haven't returned, or some of them returned 20 years later. So yeah.
And backing up a bit, like how did you mentioned you were in school in the U.S. when you made this film, and how did you first hear of Jose's story and decide to choose it as the subject of your film?
No, I know Jose since I was a kid, and so I knew, so I missed Nando's wake, and that had also been that was also something that I had been thinking for years about, like 3 years. Yeah, and part of the reason why I decided to make the film was because of that. I wanted to go and see Jose and see his family, and then after that, I've just been not making films always about them, but sort of with them.
Are they the family in Las Nubes as well, or
No. That's a different family. That's a different man. Yeah.
same town but different?
Same town. Yeah. It's like a different village,
Okay.
but also someone I know from childhood. I can't remember if he's my sister's godfather or my father is her. Anyway, he's a friend of my father since I was a kid. The man in Las Nubes. Yeah.
And that's on Criterion too.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You guys can watch it. Yeah, so you mentioned, the title is The Solitude of Memory. In Spanish is Porque el Recuerdo. Memory is very a focal point of the film, and it's the first section of the 3 sections in your film. And I was wondering if you could talk about that as a focal point, but there's something about memory that it comes back, right? And you see Jose retelling the story in different ways throughout the first section, to people or to you or to himself. So can you talk about that, like the act of remembering, and willingly or not, and how that kind of guided the beginning of your film?
Yeah. When I was in Milpillas, now that I'm remembering, actually, I did have, I had the ideas that the film was going to be about these different histories of immigration, from Jose Sr., who emigrated to the US when he was young through the Bracero program, and then his older son, Jose Jr., who migrated when there was this kind of exodus of people from rural Mexico into the US, and then Nando, who tried to cross the border about 3 times and was detained and couldn't cross. So I thought it was going to be about that. And as I was there and I was with Jose, I wasn't there for that long, actually. It was probably about a week the most. But I kept hearing him tell this story to everyone we would encounter. And I just felt like then the film had to be about him and the way he was mourning his son's death, and the chapters kind of maybe are trying to um, to exemplify that, or to, it's like he has these moments where when he speaks, it's like the morning or the memory comes through words, right? And then the memory is also very physical and spatial, right? When he's working. Um, yeah.
And then with the other two sections and the days, we have that song, which I also, this time I was really wondering what that song was, if you could talk to that.
Yeah, I mean the song is a traditional song. It's a traditional Mexican song sung by these two musicians from Guadalajara that I really admire. But these kinds of songs are interesting because the way they work is they have very kind of specific structures. They're very malleable too. They change, so there's multiple versions of El Pajarillo Jilguero, right? So this is like their version, or one of the versions that they found, and they kind of constructed themselves. And I thought, you know, somehow I wanted to have a moment like this in the film, but I didn't want it. But at that time, I was interested in, okay, if I was gonna use music in a film, it was going to be very clear. It's like kind of trying to be transparent with the audience and be like, this, you're now in this moment where you're hearing a song, right? You're not hearing music beneath the image. You're not hearing music that's kind of like, I mean, it is obviously influencing how you feel about the images, but in a way, for me, I don't know if that's the case, but I was thinking like, oh, if I use a song like this, then it is very clear to the audience what the film is trying to do at this moment, and then the audience can decide how they want to engage with this song and these words, right? Because the first verses seem very related to what's happening, but then the last verses have nothing to do really with what's happening in the film, right?
Yeah, and I think the volume also helps with that. It really like breaks away from more of the quietness in the beginning.
Yeah.
And then in the third section, the earth, he says his final words, which I think end the film, about the land that he's cultivating being fertile but thinner soil compared to some nearby land. And I found that section really beautifully kind of wraps the film together and brings it back to the idea of memory, but this time like the soil remembering, that the earth has memory as well. So can you talk about ending on this chapter about the earth and ending with those words?
Yeah, I think there is in this film, and maybe the kind of follow up to this film, Caballerango, there can be a sense sometimes, or maybe I was afraid that there seemed like the only aspect of Jose's life that I'm presenting to you is his mourning and his grief and his pain. But really, as you see it with his brothers, so with the two men that are speaking to each other, they're brothers. We also were doing other things, and eating together, laughing, making jokes. He was working, and the epilogue to me felt like an important moment to kind of describe that is outside of his grief, maybe, and also the soil. It's interesting. It's sort of like it's kind of like an inside joke, but also it's like something very real, where there is this kind of limit in this region where suddenly the earth is red, and before that the earth is darker. It's and then the red soil is very fertile, and then the darker soil is not as fertile, as he says, is thinner. And I actually, I didn't know he was going to say that, of course, but I wanted to speak about the soil because it is something that it is something that defines the region quite a bit, and actually gives people a sense of belonging, which is interesting, right? To think about, like, it's like the soil that you're stepping on, that you're cultivating, the soil that sustains your home, and it's also that soil that sort of gives you a certain identity and sense of belonging.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll open up to the audience, so you can start preparing your questions now. So you work in both documentary and fiction. This work that we saw is documentary, or mostly documentary. But can you talk about how you approach the genres? Do you think of them similarly, or do you have very different approaches, and do you ever mix them together?
Yeah, no, I think about them very similarly, and I think less and less I go on Q&As and say, like, there's no distinction between documentary and fiction, because because the art form has sort of developed in a way where, yeah, I mean, you're engaging with certain conventions about one or the other, but I at least try, to, for me, the idea of making it clear that some of the things in my documentaries could be staged or are thought as kind of are constructed in a way that you could think of staging, right? Is a way of maybe telling the audience, and again, I don't know if I achieve it, but what you're seeing, I am constructing for you to see, right? It's not the pure reality of who you're seeing on the screen, but is what I saw, and and what I'm sharing with you. And of course, I also share it with them. They also see these films, right? But yeah, so if you see this film has a lot of that, if you look closely, the way it's edited, there's moments where there's, like, a kind of a shot and a reverse shot, and things that you would typically think of in relationship to dramatic films, or when he gets in the car, right? He leaves his stuff, and then the camera's suddenly in the perfect place to catch him. He gets in the car and leaves, and so on, right? There's multiple, and then there's also moments that are just constructed through the edit that are trying to reflect on this, like the conversation with his brother, and how it's cut together at some point, especially by the end of the scene. Yeah, and probably a couple of more moments. But yeah, definitely, I think a lot about that, and also with my fiction films. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to talk too much right now about those films that you haven't seen, but they are very, first of all, they are completely infused with the reality of the place, and the way I try to film is, to create kind of these situations where the actors can move as if they were in a kind of real situation, let's say, right? So there's very little coverage and things like that. And yeah, thinking about space as, like, infusing it with certain sense of that what we're doing is real, is really happening, right? Yeah.
Because the grief is real and the feelings are real, right? So it's enunciating through the construction. We can open it up to audience questions. There are 2 mics, so please wait for the mic. But you can raise your hand and we'll bring one to you.
First, thank you for the wonderful film. I really, really enjoyed that. At the very start of this discussion, you said this film made you feel emotional again. Can you describe like what those emotions were and why? Was it just because of the content, or was it like thinking of yourself as the younger filmmaker, or like what was the things that made you?
Yeah, I mean, because it's people I know, and seeing them retell these painful memories is, yeah, mostly that. I mean, there is also a sense of nostalgia for me, but I think the other feelings were maybe a bit more present, because, and also I'm working with them again, and I'm editing, a film where I'm seeing them every day as they are now, especially Jose as he is now, um, as opposed to as he was then. And yeah.
Other questions?
Hola.
Hola.
Y cómo cuando tú le presentas el film a él, entiendo que tú has vuelto varias veces con este personaje, serían como dos preguntas, aprovecho. Una es, ¿tú sientes que esta primera película ha sido algo así como, no como un capítulo pensando cronológicamente como en algo, sino como una fotografía de un personaje que tú estás como desarrollando de una manera más completa en tu filmografía? Como me entiendo que estás trabajando con él hoy y que esta persona está también en otros trabajos. Y la otra es cómo recibieron ellos, no solamente él, sino la comunidad o la gente que vio la película, cuál fue el feedback, cómo fue su feedback, pues, cómo lo recibieron ellos.
Sí, gracias.
Can I translate?
Yes, please.
There was a two-part question. The first part is asking if you see this film as a first chapter or a photograph in time of Jose, especially since now Juan Pablo is continuing to work with the family in other contexts. And then the other part of the question was, what was the feedback? How was the film received by the family specifically, by the community of the town? And
That's interesting. I'd never thought about it as like part of a, sort of like this is one image of him, and then the image evolves in a way. Because I think that after I finish a film, it's hard for me to know if what I'm gonna do next. But I will say that with this new film, I was filming someone else, and I was gonna make a film about someone else who lives across the street from Jose, and he's another person who's also in Dos Estaciones in our last film, and then one day they invited me for lunch, and then I was like, can we also film with you? And they said yes, and we started filming with them, and now they're very, they're a very important part of this new film. But I think the way they received it, I mean, they were very emotional, all of them, when they watched the film, and it was interesting. Like, they would be. They were emotional. They felt like, especially his daughters, were like kind of like happy that he was able to speak about these feelings, because he's a man from this region, and expressing these feelings is nothing, is not common. But then something that happened that was interesting with Jose is that then every time I would go to Milpillas, then he kind of started taking me around everywhere, and he was like, oh, let's go shoot here, and let's go see this person, and let's film some more here. And come and see, you know, my brother's family and talk to them. And if you see, Caberango is a larger film of this, and it it is about the community, the whole community, not just this family, because there was kind of something that happened in that time with the community where a lot of teenagers um, were going through this, through what Nando went through. So when I was making that film, he was being part of the whole process. Yeah, I don't. Does that answer the questions? Yeah.
Hey, one more audience question. There's one in the center back.
Hi, my name is Sarah Waters, and I want to say I really appreciated the film very deeply. It really moved me. Probably because I'm a parent and I have had my own conflicts with my own children. But I think one of the most moving things was that it was not just that he was remembering his son, but that he was regretting the way that they interacted. And it seemed like that memory was the focal point of why it was so painful. Was that your feeling when you heard that memory from him?
Yeah, I think that added to his pain a lot, because he had a very good relationship with his son. You know, as he says it, they saw each other every day. They drove together to work every day. He taught his son everything his son knew. You know, he was a horse wrangler as well, and he learned from his father. And I think that, you know, yeah, I mean, you know, of course, everybody would tell him, like, you know, this is just, you couldn't, you should not regret it, because it's just like, you know, any parent would have been mad at that moment. Like, it's, you know, but it is, of course, as a parent, you know, it's not easy to think that that was the last words that you spoke with your son, right?
Yes. I have one other question. Another filmmaker, a Chinese filmmaker, came to mind when I saw the way that you framed and handled your cinematography. Do you know the films of Ho Xiaoxian?
Yeah, of course.
So I was wondering if that was an inspiration to you at all.
Yeah, yes. I mean, I guess, you know, he's always been an inspiration to me, and other filmmakers too. You know, I would say at that time I was maybe thinking a little bit more about Chantal Ackerman and other filmmakers, but yes, he's very important to me, actually.
Yeah. No, the beauty of the framing and how emotional it is, even though the camera is absolutely still, is very beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe before we finish, could we just hear a little bit more about the new project you're working on and what state of production it's in? When can we see it?
What state is it? I hope it'll be done, you know, like the edit. I hope that edit will be done soon, maybe a month from now. And yeah, and it's a film about, so Beto, who is their neighbor and who I also met when at the same time as I met them, he's a butcher. Because he's in Caberango. So anyway, he's a butcher in Milpillas, and he's a butcher in Milpillas, and he takes care of his dad, of his elderly dad. And then Vero, Jose's dad, takes care of Jose, because Jose right now has very advanced Parkinson's disease and is bedridden. And so the film is about that labor and also their work outside of that labor. So it's a film about work. and that relationship that they have with their parents, that their fathers, that they take care of now. And both of them, Vero and Boti, lost their mothers around the same time. So yeah, it's a film about, sort of the everyday, and also it reflects on a little bit on like the years that I've been filming there. And it's also a film about the village itself. So there's kind of like within the film there's like the history of the village. Yeah, I'm very interested in microhistory. So like, how microhistories kind of relate to these bigger either national histories or regional histories.
Can't wait to see it. Juan Pablo, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.